House of EdTech, episode 104.
Hey everybody, this is Joe Juba, and I just want to tell you just how smart you are for tuning in to the House of EdTech with Chris Nessie.
Support for this episode of the House of EdTech comes from my awesome supporters. If you want to become an awesome supporter, just go to chrisnessie.com/awesome. Welcome to the House of EdTech podcast. I am your host, Chris Nessie. The House of EdTech explores how technology is changing the way teachers teach and the impact that technology is having in education. I discuss technology that is changing our classrooms and schools, and I share tools and tips that you can hear today and use tomorrow. You're going to hear the stories of teachers, leaders, and creators just like you. The purpose? Whether you use it or not, technology is changing the way you teach and how your students learn. And welcome back inside the House of EdTech podcast. So happy you've chosen this particular podcast and this particular episode for some anytime, anywhere professional development. If you're new to the program, hey, boy, did you choose a great episode to jump on. I've got Richard Byrne from freetechforteachers.com, not talking about something you might think we would talk about, but a topic that is of great interest to Rich and people like myself, and potentially you. So thank you for checking out this episode. This episode also has my EdTech thought, where we're going to be having a little opinion here, and we're going to be talking makerspaces versus libraries. We've got the EdTech recommendation, where everything old is new again, so make sure you tune in for the recommendation. We've also got the House of EdTech VIP live coming up, so don't go anywhere. Or even if you do, when you come back, it's all still here because this is recorded. And again, of course, we do have a conversation with Richard Byrne from Free Tech for Teachers. A couple of announcements here at the top of the show. First, March Madness is coming. Yes, as the NCAA and college basketball is apparently falling into disarray as per current events, there's a different kind of March Madness and a different Final Four coming up very soon, and that would be the 2018 House of EdTech Final Four. And as here, we're entering year 5, so this would be the 5th annual House of EdTech Final Four. We're changing it up a little bit. We're expanding the field, as it were. And I am partnering with Eric Geis and Nick Johnson, both of New Jersey, both from the Hopewell Valley Regional School District. Throughout the month of March, we're going to be conducting an actual EdTech March Madness bracket. And you are going to be able to participate by voting and seeing if you can get your favorite EdTech tools to the Final Four. And this is all going to culminate with my upcoming episode 107, which will come out on April 8th, 2018. For more information, you're going to want to follow along with the hashtag on social media, and the hashtag is HoET Final 4, and that is the number 4 for the hashtag. Looking forward to working with Eric and Nick on this particular project. It should be pretty fun, pretty exciting, and certainly create some great content here on the podcast. Speaking of great content, did you know that I have a Facebook group for the House of EdTech? Well, Christy Adams knows, and she's in the group, and she asked this question recently. Quote, "In a couple of weeks, I will be teaching students about video creation for 2 different subjects. I'm looking for free stock video websites that students can use to learn to create book trailers for English language arts, and for free stock video sites that students can use to create videos in history, specifically World War II battles. Any suggestions are greatly appreciated." Now, before even I got to this question, former guest of the podcast and friend of the show and also a member of the Facebook group, Nate Nagel, he recommended YouTube and filtering the search results to show only Creative Commons classified videos, and also to check out archive.org. Great answer. I don't have any other type of free option other than going to resources like that because, if you're subscribed to any other type of service, it's going to be really difficult for students to get the videos off of there. Whereas, you can go to YouTube and there are tools that you can get those Creative Commons videos downloaded from both YouTube and also from archive.org, so that way your students can be using video content to create other video compilations. So great advice by Nate Nagel. Now, if you have other suggestions, please head over to chrisnessy.com/Facebook. Now, just so you know, I don't promote this group anywhere else but right here on the podcast. So if you want to join up with what we're doing over on Facebook, again, chrisnessy.com/Facebook, and I will see you over there. That's all I have here at the top of the show. Got some other things to share with you later on towards the end. But for now, let us head over to the EdTech Thought. For this episode's EdTech Thought, I've called it Makerspaces versus Libraries. Here we go. I'm going to cut to the chase. In my opinion, makerspaces are great, and certainly a valuable addition to any school. The opportunity to encourage students to tinker, design, create, collaborate, and more is priceless. Now, I say priceless, but some makerspaces are coming with a very high cost, and we're not talking about dollars and cents. There are too many schools that are paying for their makerspaces with their libraries and media centers. Now, you're listening to the House of EdTech. I love technology, I love education, I love being on the cutting edge. I am all for 21st century learning, but not, and I'm going to go out there, not at the expense of our school libraries and librarians. Sadly, there are schools out there that have and are eliminating their librarian positions in favor of a more technology-oriented certification for their employee or employees, and some school officials are chomping at the bit and are excited to throw out all the books and clear out the library to put in a makerspace. This has happened, this is happening, and sadly, it's going to continue to happen. Now, I am partly passionate about this topic because, as you know, or if you're new, my wife Caitlin is a librarian in a high school. But I am also passionate about this because I'm also old school in some regards. Students are leaving high school and sometimes college not knowing how to find quality information. And we're not just talking about research for essays and papers. We're already on the brink of our children not knowing how to sign their names because script is not being taught everywhere. Let's not sacrifice the books for what some people believe is a world of making. Let's stop trading valuable libraries full of life and books and community in their entirety for what basically amounts to fancy chairs, 3D printers, Keurig machines, Lego. We're all familiar with what a makerspace can look like. And I'll finish my EdTech thought with this. And it's something that Caitlin shared with me just the other day. She said, quote, "When you ask Google a question, it will give you a million answers. When you ask a highly qualified librarian, you just get the right answer." And that's my EdTech thought. Now it's time for this episode's House of EdTech recommendation, where everything old is new again. And for this recommendation, I'd like to talk about Padlet. Yes, Padlet. You used to use it. You remember using it. When was the last time you used Padlet? Well, I've talked about Padlet before on the podcast, but they've recently added some great new features. For example, on Padlet you now have native video recording. And video recording works on Chrome, Firefox, Windows, Mac, Chromebooks, Padlet for the iOS app, Padlet Android app. You can now add video. They also have a great new back channel feature where if you've ever set up Padlet before, you could have different templates of how the content will appear. They now offer one where it looks like a back channel, which is a new way to collaborate using the familiar messaging-like interface that we're used to, where messages pop up on the left and the right, and everything is kind of, nice and neat in a big column that you can scroll through the history of. They've also added reactions, and this enables peer-to-peer or teacher-to-student quantitative feedback on Padlet, and this allows you to collaborate in many new ways. At the time I'm recording this, you can choose from one of 4 reaction types. You can choose to like a post. You can also employ the upvote, downvote of posts. You can also give posts 1 to 5 stars. And you can choose to score posts on a scale defined by you. For example, rating a post 0 to 20, 0 to 100, etc. When I first read about these updates and new features, I joked on social media that we should and probably would start to see Padlet fever. These are solid additions, and when you put Padlet and Flipgrid toe-to-toe right now, in my opinion, I think Padlet has pulled ahead. To check out these great new features, head over to Padlet.com, and that's Padlet.com. And that's my EdTech recommendation. Now it's time for this episode's featured content. And without any further ado, here is a conversation I recently had with Richard Byrne from freetechforteachers.com about copyright, protecting intellectual property, and the Karate Kid. So let's go to the tape. All right, ladies and gentlemen, joining me today on the podcast for the featured content is Richard Byrne. Richard is a former high school social studies teacher, best known for developing the website and blog freetechforteachers.com. He's been invited to speak at events all over North America, Europe, Australia, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and other parts of the Milky Way that we can't even mention quite yet. Rich's work is focused on sharing free web-based resources that educators like me and you can use to enhance our students' learning experience. He believes that when used correctly, like myself, technology has the power to improve student engagement and student achievement. Rich, welcome to the House of EdTech.
Hey, thanks. It's going to be fun.
Shall we dive in?
Let's do it.
All right. So Rich is here to talk about a never-ending battle of sorts that he really faces and that some of you might be facing too. More teachers than ever are putting themselves out there, whether it's through Twitter or through blog posts or like myself, starting podcasts and really putting out our voice. And Rich, you've been battling, you could tell us for how long, really, people who take what you have put out there and maybe claim it as their own or leave your name on it, different things like that. But so let's talk a little bit about your experiences with the content you've been putting out.
I started this Free Tech for Teachers site way back in 2007. It didn't take long. It took less than a year before I started to see, things I was writing. At that point, I wasn't making a whole lot of videos. Whatever it was, I would find it, popping up on other websites, other blogs in its entirety. And, when I started doing that, it was, some 10 or 11 years ago, I started to see it. And the problem's never gone away. It has had some lulls in its time, and it has some peaks in its time in how often it happens and how egregiously it happens. It's called a decade-long battle at this point. A lot of times it's trying to educate others about it. And that's the piece where, some of the videos I made recently about it in the last month and a half or so, where I get really passionate about it is because I get frustrated because I feel like I've been talking about it for a decade and no one listens.
Again, I'm sure, you've been on other podcasts, you guest blog post, and it's always probably, hey, Rich, give us your top 10 tools to, blah, 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 blah. So I think this is something different for you to kind of to share.
This is definitely a different podcast for me, and I appreciate it because this is an issue that I think speaks to anyone who's ever written a blog post, made a podcast, even just made a Google Doc and made it public. You may not even realize that this happened to you, but you've probably had some content that's been, either copied and pasted or reused improperly. And so when I just mentioned about the frustration, sometimes the education piece of it, often it's not an issue of someone trying to blatantly copy and paste your work. That's an easy one to deal with. Someone blatantly copying and pasting your work, or someone blatantly ripping your video and republishing it, or someone blatantly taking your graphic that you made and trying to sell it on Teachers Pay Teachers. That's relatively straightforward to deal with because you can just send a DMCA takedown notice to the offending party and or their web host and pretty quickly have that thing resolved.
Actually, hold on real quick. I don't mean to cut you off, but let's just break that down to start, because even doing that might be intimidating. Was that difficult to do the first time you felt compelled that was the step you needed to take?
Oh yeah, I had to Google the hell out of that. Yeah. So if we back up 10 years, I kind of rolled that one off like, anyone should know how to send a DMCA takedown notice. No, that's something you learn after doing it for 10 years. So a DMCA takedown notice, for folks who aren't familiar with it, it's a Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And according to that, services that provide web hosting, so that could be Google if it's on a blogger site, it could be YouTube if someone's ripped your video and tries to repost it on YouTube. And there's a quick Google search will find a template for you for DMCA takedown notice form. It's a very simple form, one page. And the pain in the butt about it is that you have to provide links to your original content and explain how it has been infringed upon by somebody else. Right? So you have to, that's the part that's like, oh gosh, you feel like you're doing an hour's worth of work to make somebody else do what they should do to begin with, right? Which is not steal your stuff. So it's almost like, getting a speeding ticket for going 55 miles an hour in a 50 mile an hour zone, or something like that. Like, oh man, or it's more like getting a ticket for going 56 in a 55 zone or something like that. It's like
it's a pain for you to go through the process to make the person who gets it be like, really? Come on.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And the template for a DMCA takedown notice, just do a quick Google search for it. You'll find a zillion of them. The pain in the butt of it is, providing evidence that, yes, it's your original work and that person stole it. Right? And then you have to submit that to the whatever hosting company it is. Google makes it pretty easy to do. They have an online form for it if it's on a blogger, or if it's on YouTube, they have pretty easy forms for it. Other companies make it a little bit more difficult, but either way, that's pretty straightforward. While that's annoying, that's not as annoying as the other issue, which is someone who doesn't think they're doing anything wrong. When you find someone blatantly copying and pasting, like usually they know they're doing it wrong and they're just waiting to get caught,
or hoping they don't,
But really, you're going to get caught. It's not rocket science to catch you. If you're a blogger, if you're a podcaster, if you're a video blogger, you're going to have a Google alert set up for yourself and your stuff. So you're going to get alerted to it pretty quickly. And if you're not, and if you don't, someone who follows your work is probably going to tip you off to it. And the ones that are more difficult for me to deal with is, going to, finding your work on, let's say, a school website. An example I'll give of this is, I've found my work on the web pages or the blog section for a school's IT department. where they're copying and pasting the entire articles, they mean it in a way that's, trying to make it easier for their staff to find your work, right? To they're like, oh, we found this great tutorial on how to do XYZ, or we found this really thought-provoking article about assertive discipline, or whatever it is, right? And so they post it on their own site, copied and pasted, and they might put a link to it. They might say, we found it here, or it was written by so-and-so. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. But that's still a copyright violation. That's the thing. If you copy and paste and reuse it without permission, with the exception of if someone's put it in the public domain or some Creative Commons license, that's still a copyright violation. And so that's a little more difficult one to stomach, because, it's a school which should be promoting following copyright, and they're not. Right. That's the one that's a little bit more difficult. And so that's the one you have to kind of deal with a little bit more of, kid gloves. If you will.
And actually, when you say that, the phrase that comes to mind for me is, and I've used it in conversations, and I've used it even here on the show, and I joke, but I do understand the seriousness is, and something I've said is, in education, we beg, we borrow, and we steal. I think for as long as we've been educators, teachers have always felt, oh, I can bring the book to the copy machine and I can make copies of any book. I'm using it in class. It's for the greater good, and all of those things. But even here talking to you, and my wife is a librarian, and I've had conversations with other people who better understand it than most of us. But those are things that we know that are out there.
Well, yeah, it's that idea. Well, I think part of it, you mentioned that your wife's a librarian, which is great segue for me here. For folks listening, we didn't plan this. This is just happening organically. There's a lot of misconceptions about fair use, right? There's a lot of people who will say, well, I'm using it in my classroom for educational purposes. I must be able to use it. Well, it's not that straightforward, right? And the kind of the example I give of this a lot of times when it comes to copying and pasting or reusing stuff that you find online is that, if you say, well, I'm using it for education, therefore I can use it however I want. Try to take that argument to Pearson when you justify making 1,000 photocopies of one textbook, right? Like they're going to want their money.
That's true.
They're going to want their royalty.
Sell you one,
right? Right. They don't sell you. Right. They don't sell you one copy so you can make photocopies of it. They sell you, a boatload of them so that you can redistribute those. And a lot of folks don't know that prior to working in education, I worked for FedEx, and I was a trainer at FedEx for a few years after college. And one of the things that one of my early lessons in copyright is we used to show a film in one of our training sessions, not really a training session, but more of a retreat. The film, Remember the Titans.
Absolutely, great film.
Great film. Great film. A lot of lessons about leadership and teamwork in there. And it was shown during this little 2-week retreat sort of thing. And I think at the time we had to pay in the neighborhood of $750 every time it was used, somewhere in that neighborhood. Now at that time you could have gone to Blockbuster still. Blockbuster still existed. You still could have gone to Blockbuster back then and gotten it on VHS or possibly DVD for $3, right? But that was not the intended use of the copy that you get at Blockbuster, right? And one of the things that another example of this is, if you're ever watching Major League Baseball or the Super Bowl or any of those other any sporting event, there's always a disclaimer at the beginning that this is for the viewing pleasure of our home audience only.
Yep. At the beginning of, the radio broadcast, whether it's down here, Yankees, whatever, the sole property of Major League Baseball, blah, blah, blah. Yep. We've all heard it.
Yeah. You're right. We've all heard it, and most of us never think anything of it, right? Well, you'd think differently if you were the owner of a bar, of a sports bar, or something like that, because there's a different licensing for that. And I didn't know this until just a few years ago. There's different licensing packages for public viewing of sporting events. Now, a lot of bars don't pay that. A lot of establishments don't pay that. But your major franchise type establishments, they will pay that. They do pay that. They pay a different licensing fee,
right.
So they can show
Applebee's
Super
just
Bowl
doesn't
in their
get
bar.
DirecTV and throw the satellite on their building.
And the same with right, exactly, yeah. So, so there's a lot of that copyright and that fair use that people just don't understand, and that's part of the challenge, I think, for a lot of educators, particularly folks like yourself and anyone else who's producing content that you can absorb freely, right? You can listen to your podcast for free. You can read my blog for free 900 times a day if you want to. In fact, I'd encourage that.
And maybe click an ad or two.
You can do that for free, but you can't copy and paste and steal it, right? So, so there's a lot of nuance there, and that's the challenge for a lot of us is educating other people on how that works, and I think to be in our digital world today, I think that's a responsibility for anybody. If you're doing, I talk to schools all the time, and I do workshops all the time about video production in classes. And one of the things I'm always emphasizing is try to use media that you've created yourself. And if you can't do that, try to find media that's in the public domain. Right? And if you can't do that, then try to find stuff that's Creative Commons licensed. And if you can't find anything in those three categories, go back and try again. Because fair use is such a murky area that
I get really that a lot, even in podcasting, where people will and have come to me to ask, for podcasting advice and how to do this, with content creation, and they'll always be like, can I use like copyrighted music if I bought it in iTunes and things like that? And I'm like, no. And they're like, well, what if I just want to play like 10 seconds of my favorite song and make that my theme song? The answer is no. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and Richard's not a lawyer, so please consult an actual lawyer for actual legal advice, but you just can't. As much as I would love to, start my podcast with Enter Sandman, I can't. Or, the Hulk Hogan theme. I can't do that.
Full disclosure, I do know a good intellectual property lawyer if you need one. I went to college with.
Please give this person a shout out.
His name is Jared Canton. He's a great guy. Went to college with him. He works for a big corporate firm now. But anyway, so the music thing is an interesting one too. And that's one that I think a lot of kids would understand. I think a lot of students will actually understand that one because they've bought stuff on iTunes, or they've bought stuff on Google Play or whatnot. And it's not an accident that the Apple and Google make it difficult to get the music out of there, because you're purchasing the license for you to use it. You're not purchasing the license for you to broadcast it to somebody else, right? And to use it in a different environment. So that's one that I think kids actually do understand. When you say it's hard to get your music out of there, isn't it? And like, yeah, it is.
Absolutely.
Right. So
I mean, I don't purchase a lot of music, but when I do, and like I want to move it, like if I get a new iPad or a new whatever device, I always have to go and find something somewhere that refreshes me on, all right, how can I actually move it and like move my iTunes library to a new PC, and it's always a pain in the neck.
Yeah, it's a total pain in the neck. It's a total pain in the neck, and that's why there's no music on the laptop I'm using right at this moment. Well, and that's why the streaming services are so popular too, because then you don't have to worry about moving that stuff around. Then the streaming service makes it even, if you just get a streaming service, you don't even have the option to download the music anymore, right? So that's one thing that I think kids do understand pretty well, but teachers don't always understand it. And I think that's the bigger thing, is getting teachers to understand it so that they don't let kids right click and save on the first picture they find on Google Images.
Right. Or how to go in and, adjust the search to do, a search for Creative Commons images. And even that with Google, be warned, some things are miscategorized.
Google Images might be the worst place to find copyright-friendly images, actually, because there are so many cases of it not actually being copyright-friendly even though you've used that filter. There are better places. Unsplash Photos is one that I like a lot. Pixabay is pretty well known as well. So
Unsplash, I love Unsplash.
And Unsplash now has, if you're a Google Slides user, they now have an add-on for Google Slides. It makes it really easy to add stuff to your slides. So there's that piece of it. But when we start talking about this issue of copyright when it comes to teachers, for someone who's out there listening and thinking, I made a great lesson plan and I want to sell it on Teachers Pay Teachers. Someone asked me, she wants to sell some of her lesson plans on Teachers Pay Teachers, and she wanted to know about some images for Creative Commons licensed images. And I was like, well, I wouldn't use Creative Commons licensed images if you're going to sell it on Teachers Pay Teachers, because there's so many variations in Creative Commons licensing, and some of the Creative Commons licensing doesn't allow for commercial reuse. So I would try to use my own pictures if I could, or my own images if I could. And if I can't do that, then I'd look for some public domain stuff. But I wouldn't, if I'm going to try to sell something on Teachers Pay Teachers, I wouldn't even touch Creative Commons, let alone fair use. I mean, if you tried to make a fair use argument on Teachers Pay Teachers, you're going to lose.
Oh, of course. Most fair use things you're going to lose because, court fees alone. And I don't know how many teachers are getting taken to court on things like this. I've never used Teachers Pay Teachers. I have my own opinions on that for a future episode yet to be recorded.
Oh, can you bring me back for that one?
I will put you down for that one.
All right.
Cult that it is. And that's all I'll say about that for now.
Well, the thing about Teachers Pay Teachers and since you brought it up, I'm gonna rant about it for a second. The thing about Teachers Pay Teachers that I find a little bit disturbing is the copyright issue. I have found my own stuff on Teachers Pay Teachers. I don't have a Teachers Pay Teachers account. I didn't put it up there. Someone else put it up there.
Now, when you say stuff, what type of content of yours are you finding there?
A few years back, more than a few years back now, I think it's 7 or 8 years ago, one of my colleagues and I, he had built one particular interactive game for students to play. Not an online game, an in-class game to teach some economics concepts. And I developed one of my own to also teach some different economics concepts. His was the robber barons era in U.S. history, and mine was dealing more with current economics. But so we had developed these games, and I wrote a blog post about it, and I got his permission to share a link to the Google Docs for it. Right? And it's one of the most requested Google Docs I've ever had. I still to this day, and so this was, I think it's 7 or 8 years ago they published that. And I still to this day will get, a couple of requests a week for that document, right? Well, I stopped giving access to the document a few years ago because I had found it on Teachers Pay Teachers. I'd given access to it. Someone had copied and pasted it, or, hit file, make a copy in Google Docs, and then turn it into a PDF. And I found a copy of it on Teachers Pay Teachers. And that's kind of what soured me initially on Teachers Pay Teachers. Is that, so this thing that my colleague and I had put together, and he, and Jason was nice enough to say, yeah, you know what, go ahead, write a blog post about it, include the links to it, whatever, So we had the two things there, and it just ended up being that, while it was popular, it got so popular that somebody thought that, you know what, we should put this on Teachers Pay Teachers. So that's that's my story with Teachers Pay Teachers and the copyright issue, and that's why I still do find some things from time to time on Teachers Pay Teachers. I don't go on there very often to look for things, but every once in a while, if I'm feeling kind of frisky or I'm bored, I'll go on there. I'll be like, let me just check and see if anyone's trying to profit on something I made. So
now with something like that,
yeah.
let's just say you are feeling frisky. When you go to a site like that, how are you able to find your stuff? Do people use your name as a keyword? Do they use, say, Free Tech for Teachers? Like
lucky dipping? No, just lucky dipping. Like I generally stuff like that. I just kind of lucky dip. I might have a lot of the stuff that I have produced that was downloadable in the past, or was in a Google Doc format in the past, was related to social studies. So it's just kind of some lucky dipping, lucky guessing on some keywords. And
now, when you find something, is that something where do you have to make contact with the seller, or let's say the author if it's another website? Are you going right to, say, Teachers Pay Teachers as a company, or do you go to, say the web host of somebody's website? Like what's your?
So in the case of Teachers Pay Teachers, they have a copyright claim process that you can go through. So that's pretty straightforward. It's when you find it on somebody else's site or somebody else's blog, that's when you have a few more steps to go through, if you will, because then you have to contact the author, and unless it's a super spammy looking website, where they're just copying and pasting everything they can, or they're just importing RSS feeds from everywhere.
Done a video about that. If it was December or earlier on in January. It was a whole day of videos you made.
Yeah, so so there are some sites that are just importing every RSS feed that they can find about a topic, right? And those sites, those are the ones that are relatively easy to deal with, and because usually they know that they're in the wrong and they're just kind of waiting to get caught. They're like, how long? Because the idea is they're using all these RSS feeds, they're using all this content in the hopes of getting a whole lot of page views really quickly to make some ad revenue. That's basically what they're trying to do. Those I have no trouble dealing with because I don't have any feelings for them. I don't have any compassion for them because they know what they're doing. The ones that are, like I said, the ones that are tricky are the ones that are like, it's a teacher in, a school and, pick your place. It's a new. The one that actually the only one that bugs me in the education field to speak of is when it's someone who has a job that's like technology coach or technology integration specialist or whatever, and they're copying and pasting or they're importing a full feed and republishing it on a site. That's the only one that I'm like, really? You're a technology specialist, you're a tech
Absolutely.
coach, you should know better than this. And that's when I say, all right, here's what you need to know about copyright. Like, this is why you can't copy and paste the full thing, even if you put a link back to the original source. Because I'll hear that from time to time, and you've probably heard this as well. Well, I put a link to the original source back there, so aren't we good? I gave you credit for it, right? Well, no, that's like saying I stole this from blah, 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 blah. It's like, I went down to the car dealership. Yeah, I stole the truck, but I told you I stole it from you. That's a bit of an extreme example. A more realistic example might be the student you have in class who copied and pasted a paragraph from, a website, or copied and pasted 3 paragraphs from a website and said, yeah, my source is this website.
Right.
You wouldn't accept that, right? As part of a paper, you'd be like, no, that's still plagiarism, right? That's still not okay to just copy and paste 3 paragraphs and pass it up. Even if you just give a link, even if you say I copied and pasted from here, that's that's not okay. So so I'm just rambling about that
questions.
piece now.
So now that, for those who are listening, now that we have scared them into who knows what, but now they might be afraid to read Free Tech for Teachers, but now they're like, wait, I've shared it, I've done this. Is Richard going to come after me? let's share something that will put them at ease for those who are now wish they could ask you, and I'll ask for them. Richard, what is the appropriate way for me to share your content and the content of other people who do similar things to you?
So, it's funny you mentioned the getting scared, because every time I write a blog post about it, I do get emails from people who say, I just want to make sure that I'm doing this right. And I'm happy to reassure you that you're doing it right, because most people are doing it right. I want to make that clear. I think most people are doing it right. It's a classic case of one bad apple spoils the bunch, right? So in terms of how do you do it right? Well, let's say you're on Free Tech for Teachers, or you're on Larry Ferlazzo's website, or pick your favorite tech blog, right? And you see a neat article, or a neat resource, and you say, you know what, I want to share this with my staff, or I want to share this with my audience. What I always tell people is, share it. If you want to share it on Twitter, share it on Twitter. And share it with whatever hashtag you're using to share stuff with your staff, your audience, whoever it is. If you want to share it on Facebook, share it on Facebook, because those tools are built into every blog these days, right?
Right. Most sites will have a share to Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, right?
Pinterest, whatever, right? That's pretty straightforward. The ones that are trickier, like, okay, I have my own blog and I want to share this information with the audience from my blog, which might be overlapping. And I'm going to use the example of Larry, because Larry Ferlazzo and I have been doing this for almost the same amount of time. He started a few months before I did. So sometimes I'll find something on Larry's blog and I'll be like, you know what, that's really cool. I need to write about it too. My blog post might start with, I was reading Larry Ferlazzo, or thanks to Larry Ferlazzo, I just learned about XYZ awesome product. Larry wrote this, and this, and I'd encourage you to check it out. And I put a link to Larry in there, probably 2 links to him. And then what I'm going to write might be something like, Larry thought this of it. Here's what I think of it. That's one way to do it. Another way to think about doing it is, maybe I'm not going to write a blog post about it. Maybe I'm just going to email it to my friends. And I say, here's the first sentence. Here's the rest. And here's the link to read the rest. That's another easy way to do it as well. The idea being that you're not just copying and pasting. It might be that if you're not going to write your own original thing, just say, you know what, I found this really interesting, and I think you will too. Here's the link to go read the original article, or here's the link to go watch the original video, that sort of thing.
Right. You'll give your own commentary.
Give your own commentary on it. It's not just copy and paste from that site.
Well, now that you've said those two things, my conscience feels cleared, because in my activity pre-House of EdTech, I would send out, in my district, an email on Fridays called, Mr. Nessie's EdTech Roundup. And I would be crowdsourcing blogs like yours, like Larry's and others, where it would be like, here are some of the things I have found. And I would put the headline and link to, here's where it came from. So through an email, it's like, here's like, I've curated headlines. Go click on these links and go to their sites and read their articles and watch their videos. So am I good there?
Yeah, probably the, one of the best examples of this you can find online right now, if you wanted to go look for it, is on Audrey Waters' Hack Education blog. I think it's every Friday or maybe every Saturday. She does a week in EdTech roundup, and it's categorized. She has 5 or 6 different categories for it, and she'll have 3 or 4 articles in there, or 3 or 4 topics within each category, or articles within each category, which is just what you just said. It's a headline, and maybe Audrey's kind of snarky commentary on it, and the link to the original thing.
Awesome. Well, Rich, I can't thank you enough. I mean, you gave me more time than I had even asked for. So thank you so much for a few minutes here on the podcast.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm always happy to ramble, and that's the danger of putting me on a podcast, is that I will ramble. Can I just give a quick shout out to to my friend Beth Holland, if you're not familiar with Beth's work, she still works part-time for edtechteacher.org. Beth and I have done some work on copyright in the classroom together, and we actually did a free webinar about it last fall that you can find. I think I gave you the link to that, Chris.
Yes, it'll be in the show notes for this episode for sure.
Awesome. And Beth is a great counterpoint to me, or a great ballast to sometimes my kind of off the hook kind of kind of response to the copyright. Beth is sometimes a little bit more calm about it, and so I'd encourage folks to if you're looking for someone who's a little bit more calm about the issue.
Well, if I wanted calm, I'd have went to her. I wanted fiery, so that's why I brought you in. So for anybody,
awesome. For
anybody who still has questions, or obviously, I mean, anybody who listens to my show, they've definitely heard of freetechforteachers.com. But for anybody who wants to connect with you, what are the ways that they can do that?
So probably the best way to get a hold of me is through email. It's richard@burn.media is the only email address that I actively check on my phone. Otherwise, you can find me on Twitter. It's twitter.com/rmburn, BYRNE. Where else would you find me? You'd find me on Facebook, facebook.com/freetechforteachers, or facebook.com/practicaledtech. You might find me on Pinterest. You might find me on Instagram or LinkedIn or anywhere else. Just Google me. Just Google me.
I was going to say, and if you find Richard in a place he probably doesn't want to be, let him know.
I will say this: if you find my name next to a children's book about dinosaurs, that's not me. And I'd be happy to Skype with your classroom about the book, but you probably want the author. I do get that. I get that request from time to time. There's also a guy who's really good at karate that you'll find in Google image search for my name. That's also not me. I am not good at karate, although I did spend a lot of time watching Karate Kid in the 80s. So
I was going to say, I've watched it a bunch too, but that's not going to save me if somebody comes after me.
No. And if I tried the crane kick right now, I'd probably be in traction for a couple of weeks.
And you got a couple of years on me, and I know I can't do it. So there you go. All right, Rich. Thank you so much. And you're definitely on the list of people who I'm going to bring back. And actually, I'm going to apologize here at the end of the conversation that it took 104 episodes to get you on here.
That's all right. You got me on there. I'd better to be 104 than not at all.
That is true. All right, Rich. We will talk to you again soon.
All right. Thanks. Have a good night.
Hey, that was a great conversation. Thank you again, Rich, for taking time to come on to the House of EdTech. If you're not connected with Rich, obviously check out the show notes at chrisnessy.com/104. Head over to freetechforteachers.com and let Rich know what you thought about this. And maybe you're in a position where you need to reevaluate how you are sharing the content you are sharing. And hopefully, you make those improvements. If you're doing it the right way, make sure that you also promote doing it the right way with the people that you encounter. And now, let's head over to this episode's House of EdTech VIP. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for this episode's House of EdTech VIP. And I've got a special treat for you here in episode 104. This is the first ever House of EdTech VIP who is not yet a teacher. The House of EdTech VIP is Miss Emily Oates from the University of Minnesota. And I've got Emily on the line, I guess, if this was radio. Emily is right here with me. How are you, Miss Oates?
I'm good. I'm really excited to be here.
It is my pleasure. And as I said to you, the reason I wanted to have you on is because literally what it boils down to, you shared my podcast in an undergrad education course, and I thought that was super cool. So let me first start by asking, just share a little bit about yourself, your background. The floor is yours.
So I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and then I moved to Wisconsin in high school, and then I ended up going to University of Minnesota. I was a science major for a year, and then I realized that I just missed working with kids so much that I ended up switching majors and doing education because in high school, I had worked 2 semesters in a preschool, and nannying has always been my job forever. And I just realized that I loved working with kids more than anything else.
That's awesome. I obviously love working with kids myself. Is there anybody in your family, mother, father, aunt, uncle, any other educators in your family?
Yes, I have a couple aunts who are educators, and I have an aunt who is a professor at University of Purdue in like the School of Education.
Very cool. So there are some expectations that you need to live up to, I guess, right?
Yes, and I'm very excited to do so.
Obviously, there's all different types of education. What is your concentration? Are you elementary, middle, high school? What are you focusing on right now?
I'm focusing on elementary, and specifically, I really love the lower end. The kindergartners, the first graders, those are my favorite so far, but I still have a lot to do and learn, so who knows, maybe I'll end up loving 5th grade.
And at Minnesota, what year are you? Freshman, sophomore, junior?
I'm a junior, but this is only my 2nd year in the program because I transferred from a different major.
Okay. And what's the best class you've taken so far here at the beginning of your journey?
Oh, wow. I took a diversity in children's literature class a year ago, and that class was just one of my favorite classes I'd ever taken. I learned so much in that class that I'd never thought about, and the professor was great, and it was a night class. It was like 3 hours in one chunk, but I loved every minute of it, and it was the class that actually introduced me to Twitter and made me make an account, so that was really exciting.
So if we could just restate that. So you were in a college course where one of the requirements was make a Twitter account.
Yes.
And for the first time, what is your Twitter handle so people can maybe right away start to connect with you?
My Twitter handle is Emily Oates, but instead of an O, it's a 0.
Very cool. Not to make it about the fact that you promoted the House of EdTech on Twitter. Tell me about the class that this, for some reason, came up. What is this class you're taking now? And share the hashtag, because I know a lot of educators like to kind of lurk and pop in on the pre-service teacher classes. I know I do, and I'll comment when I find stuff. So what's the class you're in right now?
So I am in, it's Technology for Teachers, and the hashtag is hashtag CI5307. And it's a very interesting class. It's mixed with face-to-face and online components. And the online components really work to emphasize the technology piece because we do a whole lot of stuff. We work with a bunch of different platforms and new tools. And at the end of the class, we make this big lesson plan that is supposed to use technology to elevate our learners and not just kind of replace a piece. So we work towards creating these lesson plans where we really use technology in a way that elevates our ability to teach and their students' learning.
Okay. So now the teacher in me is obviously going to come out with some follow-up. So what role does Twitter play in this class? What is the purpose of it? How does your professor have you using it?
Every 2 weeks, we get modules with different tasks we have to do for the online component. And usually we have some sort of Twitter tasks where we're supposed to maybe find different EdTech scholars or different podcasts or different classroom Twitter feeds. And then we can share them out with our classroom community so that we can all, check out each other's resources and see what we find. And it's really to kind of help us learn to navigate Twitter and to use it to our advantage when we become teachers.
It is so powerful.
Yeah, I'm amazed at all this stuff you can do and find. I'd never really realized how much stuff is out there. And it's really funny. Whenever I mention to my friends that I have like my professional Twitter, they don't understand. They get really confused. They're like, what do you mean a professional Twitter? And I have to kind of explain how we use it. It's very different than how I initially think of Twitter.
Now, what was your initial thought, or what are some of your friends who I'm going to guess are non-education majors? What is their perception of it?
Usually it's like, they follow celebrities and retweet all kinds of different things that they post and funny things. And I feel like Twitter a lot of times, I don't know if you've ever seen, but there's those videos and they're like, celebrities read mean tweets.
I have seen those, yeah.
So like that sort of thing is kind of more what I had in mind with Twitter because I'd never used it before. But this is like a whole nother side.
So more for entertainment and I guess, personal pleasure.
Yes.
That's what my personal Twitter account's for. I don't promote that here on the show. Since you have this great professor, who is the professor? What is their Twitter handle? Let's promote them too.
So my professor is Tiffany Nielsen, and her handle is at TNW Learning.
Cool. That will be in the show notes at chrisnessy.com/104. Make sure you also follow this awesome professor. And if you go on to the hashtag, you'll also be able to connect with not only Emily, but go connect with the other kids in the class. And I'm speaking to you who's listening. Let's go out and make these young people feel welcome, and let's bring them into the fold. Emily, before I let you go, and thank you for a few minutes here on a Friday night. I understand, you're a college student. There's more important and fun things to do besides chatting with me here on the House of EdTech. But before I let you go, you mentioned that some of the things in your class Twitter that are getting shared are all sorts of tech tools, resources, things like a podcast. So let's get a bonus recommendation here. And if you can recall something that's either you mentioned or somebody else mentioned that's a tech tool that you think is really cool and valuable, what is something that maybe you'd be excited to use if you were in a classroom right now?
I recently checked out Book Creator, which is an app where you can create, students can use it to create books. And we were looking at it from the angle of allowing students to create their own stories, especially for those students who do not get the chance to see themselves in literature because there's a lack of diversity out there, especially for children's books. So I really like the idea of using that to allow students to create their own mirrors in literature when it doesn't exist already out there for them.
Very cool. The Book Creator app is a lot of fun. I recently had my 9th grade world history students. I gave them that as an option, doing a choice board of some different projects and some tech tools, digital and, analog. But, my students have really liked it too. So I definitely think that's a winner and a solid recommendation. Once again, Emily, thank you so much for taking a few minutes here to come on. You are the House of EdTech VIP. And one last time before we let you go, just let people know how they can connect with you and start to add you to their PLN and how we can start to grow your PLN.
Feel free to connect with me on Twitter. My handle is Emily Oates. The E is capital and the O is actually a 0. So that is definitely the best way to get in touch with me.
Emily, once again, thank you so much for taking time. Really appreciate it. I hope you're able to, grow your professional learning network. And, I look forward to having you back on the podcast as a future guest, because I think that your perspective as a new educator and somebody who is at the beginning of this journey will definitely be able to lend a valuable perspective that sometimes I think the veteran teacher might forget about. Can I count on you to maybe come back in the future?
Oh, I would love to come back in the future.
Thank you so much, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for checking out this episode of the House of EdTech podcast. Thanks again to Richard Byrne of freetechforteachers.com, as well as Emily Oates. For this episode, and to keep the conversation going, head over to chrisnessy.com/104. Over there, you're going to have links to all the resources and information that were shared in this episode. You could also go over to chrisnessy.com/feedback if you'd like to send me a message through a variety of platforms. And if you enjoy the podcast, do me a favor. Go tell somebody. When you're done, tell the teacher across the hall, tell your principal, tell your superintendent, tell somebody else. If you want to share it on social media, use the hashtag HouseOfEdTech or tag me directly at HouseOfEdTech on both Twitter and Instagram. You could also become an awesome supporter of the show. A little bit goes a long way. Many thanks to Eric Kurtz, Dan Gallagher, Peggy George, Jen Giffen, Mark Rindell, Jeff Herb, Scott Titmus, and Brent Warner for all your support. Thank you so much, guys. You really make it easy to do the podcast. And if you're interested in becoming an awesome supporter, just go to chrisnessy.com/awesome. Got a new Apple podcast review. Thank you to Lynn Smargis, a 2-time guest of the podcast. And Lynn said the following: Chris has a variety of guests who are in the field using these technologies in their classrooms on a daily basis. He has a variety of educational technology information no matter what the subject area or grade level you teach. Chris is responsive to his guests who call in and gives his all to make his podcast a worthwhile listen for educators and teachers. Thank you so much, Lynn. I really appreciate your kind words. At the time of this recording, Lynn has recently launched her own podcast. Not a K-12 education podcast, but Lynn has launched the Travel Gluten-Free podcast, which you can go and check out over at travelglutenfree.me. Best of luck, Lynn, now that you're a podcaster. And speaking of Lynn, Lynn is from Utah, and I will be traveling to Utah for USET 2018 on March 22nd to the 23rd, 2018. So if you're also going to be at USET, hey, reach out, connect, let me know. I would love to meet you when I head out to Utah at the end of March. The next episode of the House of EdTech will be episode 105, and that's going to be released on March 11th, 2018. Until next time, thank you for learning with me, and remember, using technology isn't difficult. Just give it a try. The House of EdTech is a proud member of Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio. Your voice is right here. For more great content, go to voiceed.ca. The House of EdTech is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. The Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. For more, go to edupodcastnetwork.com.